What happens when a military doctrine built on 1,000 years of spiritual power and the invincibility of the warrior's soul collides with a 19-pound piece of steel from an American factory? For 4,500 Japanese soldiers on a tiny island in 1943, the answer would come in less than 3 seconds. This is the story of how an entire way of war was proven fatally obsolete by a single weapon. November 20, 1943, at precisely 6:23 hours, on the blood-soaked sands of Red Beach 2, Bidio Island, within the Tarawa Atoll, the very ground began to dance in a way no Japanese defender had ever conceived. It was a terrifying symphony of destruction, geysers of sand erupting in perfect, measured intervals, walking with an unnerving mechanical precision directly toward their hidden emplacements. Peering through the narrow firing slit of a palm log bunker, naval infantry of the Imperial Japanese forces watched a solitary figure, Marine First Lieutenant William Dean Hawkins, as he crawled relentlessly forward, clutching what appeared to be a rifle of monstrous proportions. Their own defensive manuals had assured them that American soldiers were reliant on undisciplined mass rifle fire, that the individual weapons of their foe were utterly inferior to the transcendent spiritual power of a Japanese bayonet charge. Yet, this one Marine, this singular officer with his strange and potent weapon, was poised to deliver a brutal lesson, explaining in fire and steel why 4,500 Japanese defenders on Tarawa would perish in a mere 76 hours. The Browning automatic rifle, the formidable bar, weighed a hefty 19 pounds before a magazine was even inserted and could unleash devastating 30-06 Springfield rounds at 2 distinct rhythms, a deliberate slow pace of 300 to 450 rounds per minute, or a blistering fast rate of 500 to 650 rounds per minute. Each of its 20-round magazines could be utterly exhausted in less than 3 seconds when set to its highest tempo. In those fleeting 3 seconds, as the Japanese defenders were about to witness firsthand, the entire tactical doctrine of the Imperial Japanese Army would be exposed as tragically, fatally obsolete. The scene unfolding before them would soon be replayed across 1,000 islands in the vast Pacific, a violent collision between a military culture that revered spiritual strength and the brutal intimacy of close combat, and an industrial democracy that had chillingly mechanized the very act of killing. The bar was never just a weapon, it was the embodiment of American mass production principles, flawlessly applied to the chaos of infantry warfare. And the Japanese, indoctrinated to choose death over retreat, were about to discover the harrowing truth that courage, in and of itself, meant absolutely nothing against the storm of automatic firepower delivered with the cold, unfeeling efficiency of an assembly line. A mere 20 minutes after Hawkins initiated his ferocious assault, his scout sniper platoon had systematically annihilated 3 Japanese strongpoints, using nothing more than the concentrated, overwhelming fire of their bars. The battle for Tarawa had commenced with a raw demonstration of firepower so profound that it contradicted everything Japanese soldiers had been conditioned to believe about the nature of war. The Imperial Japanese Army had marched into the Pacific War clutching tactical doctrines that were frozen in the time of their past victories against China and Russia. Their infantry manual of 1909, remarkably still in service in 1943, dedicated a full 17 pages to the esoteric concepts of spiritual power and the art of bayonet fighting, yet offered only 2 meager paragraphs on the subject of automatic weapons. The Japanese military doctrine placed its faith in Seishin, a spiritual power they believed could conquer any material disadvantage. The Bushido code they followed taught that a soldier with sufficient motivation could vanquish any adversary through the sheer force of their will alone. This was not simply propaganda, it was an institutionalized military science. At the Army Infantry School in Chiba, cadets were taught as gospel that a single Japanese soldier possessed the fighting prowess of 3 Chinese or 2 Russian soldiers, a superiority based purely on their spiritual essence. The Japanese were certainly aware of automatic weapons. They possessed their own light machine guns, such as the Type 96 and the Type 99. Throughout the war, approximately 41,000 Type 96 and 53,000 Type 99 light machine guns were produced. However, these weapons were sparsely distributed, typically at a rate of just 2 or 3 per company, and were treated as specialized support assets that demanded dedicated crews to operate. The very notion of equipping every single squad with multiple automatic rifles, of making raw firepower, rather than sheer valor, the fundamental basis of infantry tactics, was a concept utterly alien and incomprehensible to the Japanese military mind. This profound misunderstanding would prove to be catastrophic. On one island after another, Japanese soldiers would make the horrifying discovery that a single American infantry squad possessed more automatic firepower than an entire Japanese platoon. The bar, which America manufactured at almost unbelievable rates for the duration of the war, would become the enduring symbol of this lethal disparity. The Browning automatic rifle represented something the Japanese military psyche simply could not grasp: the democratization of firepower. Conceived by the legendary John Browning in 1917, meticulously refined during the interwar years, and mass-produced in quantities that defied Japanese comprehension, the bar bestowed upon the ordinary American infantryman a level of firepower previously reserved for crew-served, heavy weapons. By November of 1943, American factories were churning out bars at a velocity that would have seemed like pure fantasy to Japanese industrial planners. The New England Small Arms Corporation, for instance, manufactured an astounding 168,380 bars during the war. IBM, a company the Japanese knew only as a maker of business machines, retooled its factories and produced an additional 20,000 bars. Other manufacturers, including the Marlin Rockwell Corporation, contributed to a staggering total wartime production of approximately 350,000 bars. These numbers were simply unfathomable to a Japanese military establishment that meticulously hand-fitted each Type 96 machine gun in small workshops where skilled craftsmen might spend weeks on a single weapon. Marine Sergeant John Basilone, who would later earn the Medal of Honor on Guadalcanal, was proficient with both machine guns and bars during his service. His legendary actions in October 1942 on Guadalcanal, where he helped repel an attack by approximately 3,000 Japanese soldiers with sustained machine gun fire, starkly demonstrated the devastating impact of American automatic weapons against the Japanese tactic of human wave assaults. The weapon's technical specifications told only a fraction of the story. Yes, it fired the potent 30-06 round at variable rates reaching up to 650 rounds per minute. And yes, its effective range stretched beyond 1,000 yards. But what truly made it revolutionary was the doctrine governing its use. By 1943, every single Marine rifle squad was equipped with 3 bars. Every Army squad had at least one. This meant that small American units possessed an organic, inherent automatic firepower that could be brought to bear instantly, without the crucial delay of waiting for heavy machine gun teams to maneuver and set up. On August 7, 1942, on the island of Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands, the first major American offensive of the Pacific War would offer the Japanese their initial, terrifying glimpse of the storm they now faced. The Battle of the Tenaru, which actually took place along the Ilu River on August 21, 1942, vividly showcased what would become the repeating, grim pattern of combat in the Pacific. Colonel Kayaneo Ichiki led exactly 917 of his men in a desperate night assault against the Marine positions. Their expectation was to swiftly overrun the Americans in the chaos of hand-to-hand combat, a domain where they believed their spiritual superiority would undoubtedly prevail. Instead, they charged headlong into meticulously prepared, interlocking fields of automatic weapons fire, a curtain of steel that included bars positioned strategically throughout the Marine line. While Private First Class Alva Schmid, manning a machine gun, became a celebrated hero for his actions that night, the battle was truly won by the combined, overwhelming effect of all the automatic weapons present, including the 12 bars in the rifle companies that met the Japanese assault. Each bar gunner had been trained to fire in controlled, 6-round bursts, about 1 second of fire, and then immediately shift their position. The Japanese, charging suicidally toward the muzzle flashes, found only empty space where their enemy had been moments before. From Ichiki's original force of 917 men, only 128 survivors remained. The mathematics of the encounter were devastatingly simple. A Japanese rifle squad of 13 men could, in theory, fire 65 aimed rounds per minute with their bolt-action Arisaka rifles. In stark contrast, a Marine squad armed with 3 bars could unleash a torrent of 150 rounds in the first 4 seconds of an engagement, long before the Japanese soldiers could even work the bolts on their rifles for a second shot. The Japanese response to this overwhelming American firepower was to burrow into the earth. By late 1943, the construction of elaborate cave systems had become the very cornerstone of Japanese island defense. These were not simple holes dug in the ground, but complex subterranean fortresses featuring multiple chambers, interconnected tunnels, and carefully designed, interlocking fields of fire. Japanese doctrine considered these positions to be unassailable, believing they would require massive artillery bombardments or direct, costly assaults to neutralize. The bar, however, changed this grim calculation entirely. On November 22, 1943, back on Tarawa, the Marines encountered the first of these sophisticated Japanese cave defenses. The technique that quickly evolved in response became standard procedure for the Marine Corps. You approach the cave from an oblique angle. You position the bar gunner approximately 25 yards from the entrance. And then you fire 1 full magazine into the cave's opening in a continuous figure-8 pattern, maintaining unrelenting fire. The physics of this tactic were simple but horrifyingly effective. The 30-06 round fired by the bar maintained lethal velocity even after multiple ricochets within enclosed spaces. A single, sustained burst into a cave entrance could instantly fill the entire chamber with a storm of bouncing, unpredictable projectiles. The Marines soon discovered that emptying a 20-round magazine into a cave would create what they grimly called the hornet's nest effect. Bullets would ricochet wildly off walls, ceilings, and floors in chaotic patterns that made survival inside a physical impossibility. Japanese soldiers who had trained to hold these positions to the death discovered that death often arrived before they could even catch a glimpse of their enemy. On June 15, 1944, on Saipan in the Mariana Islands, the Japanese had spent months preparing their defenses, learning bitter lessons from Tarawa and Kwajalein. Lieutenant General Yashitsuga Saito commanded approximately 31,000 defenders entrenched in positions they considered impregnable. They had studied American tactics and prepared for everything, except for the sheer, crushing weight of automatic firepower the Americans would bring to bear. By the time of the Saipan invasion, Marine doctrine had evolved to maximize the employment of the bar. Each rifle company had been reorganized to center its entire structure around bar teams. The official ratio was now 1 bar for every 4 Marines. Unofficially, however, Marines would acquire additional bars whenever and wherever they could. Some squads went into battle operating with 5 or even 6 bars, effectively turning standard infantry units into mobile, automatic weapons platforms. The brutal Battle of Purple Heart Ridge on Saipan powerfully demonstrated the bar's devastating effectiveness. Japanese defenders had constructed a series of mutually supporting positions within caves of coral limestone, each one supposedly impossible to flank. Marine Private First Class Harold G. Epperson, though not primarily a bar gunner, earned a posthumous Medal of Honor for evacuating 45 wounded Marines under intense fire, showcasing the kind of raw heroism that allowed the bar teams to hold their positions and continue to deliver withering suppressive fire. The numbers from the Saipan campaign were simply staggering. The 2nd Marine Division alone fired an incredible 8.7 million rounds of .30-06 ammunition in just 3 weeks, much of it cycling through the barrels of bars and machine guns. The Japanese, who had expected to trade lives at favorable ratios through a combination of spiritual power and defensive advantage, instead found themselves confronting a simple, brutal mathematical reality. American industrial production could provide more bullets than Japan could provide soldiers. The impact of the bar extended far beyond the physical casualties it inflicted. It wrought a psychological destruction upon the confidence of the Japanese military. The sound of the weapon itself became a weapon. The bar's distinctive, rapid thudding, easily distinguishable from the chatter of machine guns, signified that automatic firepower was close, mobile, and actively hunting. Veterans vividly described the profound psychological impact of hearing multiple bars opening up simultaneously, a rolling thunder that announced the inescapable presence of overwhelming firepower. The psychological impact of the bar was further multiplied by American fire discipline. Marine training relentlessly emphasized short, controlled bursts that maximized both accuracy and ammunition conservation. Japanese soldiers, expecting wild, wasteful, and inaccurate American firing, instead encountered precise, measured, and methodical killing. Each burst from a bar meant casualties, not just suppression. By mid-1944, captured Japanese documents revealed a telling shift in their tactics. Their soldiers were now being instructed to identify and prioritize the killing of bar gunners, a clear recognition that these weapons formed the very backbone of American small unit tactics. But identifying the bar gunners in the chaos of combat proved to be nearly impossible. The weapons were constantly in motion, and every Marine squad had multiple automatic rifles. On February 19, 1945, on the volcanic sands of Iwo Jima, the Japanese had now faced the might of American firepower for 3 long years. General Tadamaki Kuribayashi, commanding a garrison of approximately 21,000 defenders, had meticulously studied every previous battle and adapted every possible counter-tactic. His defense-in-depth strategy, featuring interconnected tunnels that extended for 11 miles underground, represented the ultimate evolution of Japanese cave warfare. Yet the bar had evolved too. The Marines now employed specialized bar tactics that had been developed through bitter, hard-won experience. Bars up front became standard doctrine. The automatic rifleman now led advances, suppressing enemy positions while the rifleman maneuvered. The weapon that had been primarily defensive in World War I had become a fearsome offensive tool in the Pacific. Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone, the hero of Guadalcanal, now back in the heart of combat, was killed on Iwo Jima on February 19, 1945, the very first day of the invasion. He was leading his machine gun sections forward when he was struck down by mortar fire, having survived some of the most intense combat of the Pacific War only to fall in the opening hours of its most iconic battle. On Iwo Jima, only 1,083 Japanese soldiers were captured from the original garrison of approximately 21,000. The rest died where they fought, many of them sealed inside their caves by the relentless fire from bars. The Marines fired an estimated 12 million rounds of small arms ammunition in 36 days of brutal fighting. The 28th Marine Regiment alone, in their famous assault on Mount Suribachi, expended approximately 90,000 rounds of bar ammunition in just 5 days. On April 1, 1945, on Okinawa, the final, climactic battle would demonstrate the complete and utter supremacy of American automatic weapons. The Japanese 32nd Army, with a force of approximately 130,000 defenders, including Okinawan conscripts, had prepared the ultimate defense. Every lesson had been learned, every possible adaptation had been attempted. Yet they faced not just Marines with bars, but an American military machine that had perfected the mass production and mass distribution of automatic firepower. By the time of the Okinawa campaign, the U.S. military had produced over 300,000 bars. Some Army units had abandoned their official organizational structures entirely, operating with as many as 1 bar for every 2 or 3 soldiers. The 96th Infantry Division reported carrying significantly more bars than their authorized allocation, as soldiers had learned the simple, brutal truth that survival meant firepower, and firepower meant bars. Colonel Hiromichi Yahara, the senior staff officer of the Japanese 32nd Army and one of the few senior officers to survive the battle, wrote post-war accounts vividly describing the American material superiority. Though specific references to the bar in his available translated writings cannot be verified, the fall of the Shuri Line, the main Japanese defensive position, was not the result of a massive, singular assault, but rather the methodical, relentless application of overwhelming firepower. Cave after cave, position after position, was systematically cleared by the storm of automatic weapons fire. The Japanese had prepared themselves for a spiritual combat, but they found themselves facing an industrial war. The story of the bar is inseparable from the story of American industrial capacity. While Japanese soldiers were dying in their caves, American factories were performing production miracles that would have seemed utterly impossible to Japanese planners. IBM's factory in Poughkeepsie, New York, which had previously manufactured typewriters and calculating machines, retooled for bar production in 1941. By 1944, IBM had produced 20,000 bars, each one tested to tolerances far tighter than those of the Japanese hand-fitted weapons. The New England Small Arms Corporation produced the vast majority of wartime bars, a staggering 168,380 units, in a massive demonstration of American industrial mobilization. The Marlin Rockwell Corporation, which had possessed limited weapons experience before 1941, built entirely new facilities specifically for bar production. Carl Gustav Stadsgevärsfaktori, the renowned Swedish arms manufacturer, licensed bar production and reportedly offered to sell them to Japan through neutral channels in 1943. The Japanese military attaché in Stockholm investigated the possibility, but Japan lacked both the foreign currency and the shipping capacity to make such a purchase viable. These production figures, totaling approximately 350,000 bars, when compared to Japan's production of 41,000 Type 96 and 53,000 Type 99 light machine guns, revealed the stark industrial disparity. America produced nearly 4 times as many bars as Japan produced of all its light machine gun types combined. The bar's effectiveness was critically dependent on the ammunition supply, another American industrial achievement that was incomprehensible to Japanese planning. Each bar gunner in combat typically carried between 12 and 15 magazines, amounting to 240 to 300 rounds. Additional ammunition was distributed throughout the rest of the squad. A single Marine rifle squad could carry as many as 2,000 rounds of bar ammunition, in addition to their standard rifle rounds. American ammunition plants produced billions of rounds during the war. While the specific claim of 21 billion.30-06 rounds cannot be independently verified, the U.S. produced approximately 47 billion rounds of small arms ammunition of all types during World War II. This massive, unending production ensured that American forces never lacked ammunition, even when they were expending it at rates that seemed profligate and wasteful to the resource-starved Japanese forces. On Okinawa, the U.S. 10th Army fired an estimated 60 million rounds of small arms ammunition in 82 days. The XXIV Corps alone documented firing 25 million rounds of rifle and machine gun ammunition. Japanese defenders, often limited to just 100 rounds per man for an entire battle, faced an enemy who could expend that same amount in a matter of seconds. Behind these cold statistics were human beings on both sides, transformed by the advent of automatic weapons into casualties of industrial warfare. The total number of Japanese military deaths in World War II reached approximately 2.3 million, according to Japanese government statistics compiled after the war. Of these, academic research by Japanese historians indicates that a staggering 60%, or 1.4 million, died from starvation and disease rather than from direct combat. The remaining combat deaths resulted from all causes, including artillery, aerial bombardment, naval gunfire, and small arms fire. While the exact number of soldiers killed specifically by bars can never be determined, the weapon's contribution to American firepower superiority was undeniably immense. In the Pacific Theater, American forces inflicted casualties at ratios that sometimes exceeded 10-1, a feat achieved largely through superior firepower rather than any numerical advantage. By mid-1944, the Marines had developed standard operating procedures for cave clearing that maximized the bar's effectiveness. The tactical manual, based on the brutal experiences from Tarawa through Saipan, specified a systematic approach: position the bar gunner at an oblique angle to the cave entrance, maintain a standoff distance of 25 yards, fire a full magazine in a controlled pattern, use white phosphorus grenades to mark cleared caves, and maintain continuous suppression during the infantry's advance. This procedure, repeated thousands of times across the vast expanse of the Pacific, turned the desperate, close-quarters combat of cave clearing into a cold, mechanical process. The Japanese, who had meticulously designed their cave defenses to create deadly killing zones for any attackers, instead found themselves trapped in their own death chambers as bar rounds ricocheted violently throughout the enclosed spaces. The disparity between American and Japanese automatic weapons was not just quantitative, but also qualitative. The bar represented decades of industrial refinement, mass production expertise, and a level of mechanical precision that Japan simply could not match. The Type 96 and Type 99 Japanese light machine guns, their closest equivalents to the bar, required two-man crews, weighed more, the Type 96 at 19.8 pounds and the Type 99 at 23.4 pounds with bipod, and suffered from significant manufacturing inconsistencies. Japanese manufacturing, based on craft production in small workshops, could not achieve the precise tolerances necessary for reliable automatic weapons. Springs failed, extractors broke, and feed mechanisms frequently jammed. The metallurgy alone told the story. Bar barrels used chrome molybdenum steel, allowing for sustained fire without warping. Japanese weapons used inferior steel that required careful, skilled heat treatment by craftsmen, a process impossible to scale for mass production. American mass production techniques produced better weapons, faster, than Japanese craft methods could produce inferior ones. The bar transformed marksmanship from an individual skill into the systematic application of overwhelming firepower. Japanese soldiers, trained in precise, careful rifle shooting, discovered to their horror that American automatic riflemen didn't aim in any traditional sense. Instead, they walked their fire onto targets, adjusting their aim by observing the impact of their rounds. This technique, impossible with bolt-action rifles, meant that concealment and camouflage, core elements of Japanese infantry tactics, became far less effective. A bar gunner could saturate an entire hillside with a single magazine, forcing hidden Japanese soldiers to either reveal their positions or die where they lay. The concept of area denial through raw firepower, rather than precision marksmanship, represented a fundamental shift in infantry combat that Japanese tactical doctrine never successfully countered. The bar's effectiveness depended entirely on American logistical supremacy. Each bar in combat required a supply chain that stretched all the way back to American factories, across freight trains and cargo ships, to forward supply dumps. This logistical achievement was simply incomprehensible to the Japanese military way of thinking. A single Marine regiment in combat could consume approximately 40 tons of small arms ammunition weekly. This required dedicated supply ships, shore parties, ammunition carriers, and forward dumps. The Japanese, who often expected the Americans to exhaust their supplies after their initial assaults, watched in disbelief as American firepower actually increased over time. At Ulithi Atoll, a massive supply base constructed from virtually nothing in 1944, American logistics troops handled staggering quantities of ammunition on a daily basis. Transport ships made continuous, uninterrupted runs from West Coast ammunition plants to Pacific supply bases. The infrastructure required to maintain this constant flow, the ports, the ships, the handling equipment, the storage facilities, represented an investment that was beyond Japan's entire military budget. The bar represented more than just technological superiority. It embodied a fundamentally different conception of warfare itself. Japanese military culture, rooted in the ancient samurai tradition, valued individual combat, personal honor, and spiritual power above all else. American military culture, rooted in industrial democracy, valued firepower, efficiency, and mechanical advantage. This cultural chasm extended even to the treatment of the weapons themselves. Japanese soldiers treated their rifles as sacred objects, as extensions of the emperor's will, and maintained them with a near-religious devotion. American Marines, in contrast, treated their bars as tools, reliable, replaceable, and disposable if necessary. When a bar malfunctioned, a Marine could simply draw a new one from the supply depot. When a Japanese weapon failed, its soldier often died trying to repair it under fire. American bar training reflected industrial thinking applied to military education. At Camp Pendleton and Fort Benning, Marines and soldiers learned bar employment through repetitive drills, standardized procedures, and production line training methods. Each Marine fired more ammunition in training than most Japanese soldiers saw in their entire service. The standard bar training course required each Marine to fire at least 2,000 rounds in various drills. They learned instinctive shooting, how to walk their fire, the talking guns, technique of alternating fire between two bars, and how to perform rapid magazine changes. By the time they graduated, a Marine could change a magazine in under 3 seconds, clear most jams by feel, and maintain accurate fire while on the move. This massive investment in training, thousands of rounds per Marine, hundreds of hours of instruction, was possible only because of America's vast industrial capacity. Japan, chronically short of ammunition even for combat, could never provide such extensive training. Japanese soldiers often entered their first battle having fired fewer than 100 rounds in their entire training. The last great battles of the Pacific War, Iwo Jima and Okinawa, demonstrated the complete and utter dominance of American automatic weapons. The Japanese defenders, despite every advantage of terrain and meticulous preparation, faced a simple, unalterable reality. They were fighting industrial output with human bodies. On Iwo Jima, the Marines fired an estimated 12 million rounds in 36 days. On Okinawa, that number soared to 60 million in 82 days, with the Ziv Corps alone documenting 25 million rounds expended. The vast majority of these rounds went through automatic weapons. The Japanese defenders, already desperately short of food and water, spent their final days under a continuous, unrelenting hail of automatic weapons fire, unable to move, unable to fight back, simply waiting for death to find them. The statistics from these final, brutal battles revealed the unvarnished truth about modern industrial warfare. Every single Japanese defender faced hundreds upon hundreds of bullets, the output of what would have been an entire rifle company in traditional warfare, all delivered by the power of industrial logistics and automatic weapons. The atomic bombs that ultimately ended the war have often overshadowed the conventional firepower revolution that preceded them. Yet, the conventional superiority demonstrated by weapons like the bar had already shown that Japan faced an inevitable, crushing defeat. The atomic bombs killed approximately 200,000 Japanese, but conventional weapons, including automatic rifles, had already killed far more throughout the long and bloody Pacific campaign. Admiral Soma Toyota, the Navy Chief of Staff, recognized at the final imperial conferences that America's conventional superiority alone guaranteed Japan's defeat. The atomic bombs simply accelerated the surrender. They did not change the fundamental equation. Japan could not match America's industrial production of weapons and ammunition. Japanese military officers who studied in America after the war discovered the true, staggering scale of American production. Official records showed that approximately 350,000 bars were manufactured during the war, nearly 4 times Japan's total production of all its light machine gun types combined. Each bar cost approximately $75 to manufacture in 1944. The Japanese Type 96 machine guns cost significantly more in both materials and labor, while delivering inferior performance. While visiting American factories in the 1950s, Japanese industrial delegations observed the production techniques that had explained their nation's defeat: assembly lines, standardized parts, rigorous quality control procedures, all the elements that had produced superior weapons in vast, seemingly endless quantities, while Japan struggled to hand-build inferior alternatives. Military historians have since concluded that the bar, along with other automatic weapons, demonstrated the ultimate futility of Japan's resistance tactics. The weapon proved that in modern warfare, industrial capacity trumps warrior spirit, that production capability determines military capability, and that no amount of courage can overcome a massive disparity in firepower. Dr. Edward Dree, a historian of the Pacific War, noted that American automatic weapons fundamentally changed the very nature of infantry combat in the Pacific. The Japanese never developed effective counter-tactics because the problem they faced was not tactical, it was industrial. They faced an enemy who could equip every squad with automatic weapons, supply them with unlimited ammunition, and replace any losses almost immediately. The statistics support this stark assessment. In the entire Pacific War, Japanese forces killed approximately 111,000 Americans from all causes, while losing 2.3 million of their own, a casualty ratio exceeding 20 to 1. While many factors contributed to this staggering disparity, the superiority of American automatic weapons played a crucial, decisive role. The bar's impact extended far beyond a military defeat. It helped to transform Japanese society itself. The very weapon that destroyed Japanese militarism also demonstrated the immense power of industrial democracy. Post-war Japan embraced the very values that the bar represented: industrial efficiency, technological innovation, and an excellence in mass production. Japanese companies founded after the war by veterans who had witnessed American industrial might firsthand, companies like Honda, Toyota, and Sony, applied the lessons they had learned from observing American production superiority. They understood that national power came not from military conquest, but from industrial capacity. Japan's economic miracle was built, in part, on the lessons learned from witnessing the brutal efficiency of American industrial warfare. When the newly formed Japanese self-defense forces received military aid from America in the 1950s, they were equipped with American weapons, including bars. Approximately 10,000 were provided through military assistance programs. Japanese soldiers now trained with the very weapons that had defeated their predecessors, an ironic culmination of the nation's transformation from a militaristic empire to an ally of industrial democracy. In later decades, American and Japanese veterans met on the various Pacific battlefields for reconciliation ceremonies. At these poignant meetings, former enemies discussed their experiences with remarkable candor. American bar gunners and Japanese infantry survivors shared their perspectives on the weapon that had so profoundly defined their combat experience. These reconciliation meetings revealed a shared, tragic understanding: both sides had been caught in historical forces far beyond their control. The American Marines with their bars had been the instruments of an industrial democracy, while the Japanese soldiers had been the servants of a military feudalism. The collision between these two systems had produced tragedy on a massive scale, but it had also produced a profound transformation. At a 1995 ceremony on Iwo Jima, marking the 50th anniversary of the battle, American and Japanese veterans placed wreaths together at the memorials. They recognized that the weapons that had killed so many had also, ultimately, ended a catastrophic war and transformed a nation. The bar had been an instrument of destruction, but it had also been an instrument of liberation from the grip of militarism. The final accounting of the bar's impact on the Pacific War reveals the sheer scale of industrial warfare. Production comparison: bars manufactured, approximately 350,000, Japanese Type 96 LMGs, approximately 41,000, Japanese Type 99 LMGs, approximately 53,000. This represents a 3.7 to 1 American advantage in just this one class of weapon. Combat statistics: Tarawa, 3 million rounds fired in 76 hours, Saipan, 15 million rounds in 3 weeks, Iwo Jima, 12 million rounds in 36 days, Okinawa, 60 million rounds in 82 days. Casualty ratios in the overall Pacific theater were approximately 20 to 1, Japanese to American deaths. Of the 2.3 million total Japanese military deaths, an estimated 1.4 million, 60%, were from starvation and disease, while approximately 900,000 were combat deaths from all causes. These numbers tell a story of industrial asymmetry that no amount of courage could ever hope to overcome. America could afford to lose 10 bars for every single Japanese automatic weapon and still maintain superiority. They could fire hundreds of bullets for every one that Japan possessed. They could equip every squad with a level of firepower that Japan could not even provide to its companies. The bar forced fundamental changes in military thinking that extended far beyond the Pacific War. The weapon proved that portable automatic firepower, distributed at the squad level, was more effective than concentrated machine gun positions. This lesson, learned through the destruction of Japanese forces, would go on to shape military doctrine worldwide. The Soviet Union, observing America's success, accelerated its development of assault rifles. The AK-47, designed shortly after the war, was explicitly intended to give every single soldier automatic firepower. China, studying the Japanese defeats, restructured its military around automatic weapons. Even Japan's own self-defense forces, when they were established, made automatic weapons the very foundation of their infantry tactics. The transformation was complete. Warfare had evolved from individual marksmanship to industrial firepower, from warrior prowess to production capacity, from spiritual power to mechanical advantage. The bar had been the instrument that taught this brutal lesson in the Pacific, a lesson written in the blood of Japanese soldiers who discovered that courage alone could not defeat the might of American industry. General Tomoyuki Yamashita, who was executed for war crimes in 1946, had commanded Japanese forces in both spectacular victories and crushing defeats. His experience encompassed the entire arc of Japanese military fortunes, from the triumph at Singapore to the utter destruction in the Philippines. Before his execution, he reflected on the nature of Japan's defeat, recognizing that Japan had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of modern warfare. The same recognition came to other Japanese commanders who survived. They understood that the bar, and weapons like it, represented not just superior firepower, but a superior system, the ability of an industrial democracy to mass-produce the tools of war while maintaining quality and innovation. Japan had brought a warrior tradition to an industrial conflict, with predictable and tragic results. Captain Mitsuo Fukuda, who led the Pearl Harbor attack and survived the war to become a Christian evangelist, later reflected on the nature of American power. He recognized that weapons like the bar demonstrated American strength not through individual superiority, but through the systematic application of industrial capacity to warfare. Every bar was a product of American factories, American logistics, and American training systems, an entire society mobilized for industrial war. Today, in military museums across Japan, American weapons from World War II are displayed as historical artifacts. These displays often include the bar, recognizing its pivotal role in the Pacific War. Japanese visitors, especially those of younger generations, study these weapons to understand how their nation's militaristic past was so decisively defeated by an industrial democracy. The lessons are clear: national strength in the modern era comes not from a warrior spirit, but from industrial capacity, not from a willingness to die, but from the ability to produce, not from individual courage, but from systematic organization. The bar taught these lessons to Japanese soldiers who had no choice but to learn them in the crucible of combat, where the price of education was paid in blood. The transformation of Japan from a militaristic empire into a peaceful economic power was built, in part, on the lessons learned from facing American automatic weapons. The bar didn't just kill Japanese soldiers, it killed Japanese militarism, demonstrating conclusively that industrial capacity, not spiritual power, determined victory in modern war. Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima commanded the Japanese 32nd Army on Okinawa, the last major battle of the Pacific War. On June 22, 1945, facing inevitable defeat, he committed ritual suicide along with his chief of staff. His final orders to his troops acknowledged the utter futility of further resistance against America's overwhelming material superiority. Ushijima's death marked the end of organized Japanese resistance in the Pacific War. The American forces that defeated him possessed overwhelming advantages in every single category: artillery, air support, naval gunfire, and especially automatic weapons. The bar had been just one component of this vast superiority, but it symbolized the entire industrial advantage that made American victory inevitable. The cave entrances on the Pacific Islands, still scarred by the impact of bullets, stand as silent monuments to the collision between two military philosophies. In those scars lies the story of how America's automatic rifle didn't just win battles, but demonstrated the fundamental transformation of warfare from an act of individual combat into an industrial process. The echo of bar fire across the Pacific Islands was more than just the sound of victory. It was the industrial age announcing its complete dominance over all previous forms of warfare. The Japanese soldiers dying in their caves from ricocheting rounds they never saw coming were the final, tragic witnesses to the terrible efficiency of modern industrial democracy. The bar's legacy in the Pacific was not just victory, but a transformation, of warfare, of nations, of the very understanding of what constitutes national power in the industrial age. Every burst of bar fire was a lesson in this new reality, a lesson taught to Japanese soldiers who paid the ultimate price for their education. In the end, the Browning automatic rifle achieved what no treaty or negotiation ever could have accomplished. It convinced Japan, through an overwhelming and undeniable demonstration, that military aggression against an industrial democracy was not just inadvisable, but impossible. That lesson, learned in blood on the islands of the Pacific, from Guadalcanal to Okinawa, created the pacifist Japan that would become America's strongest Asian ally, a transformation that began the moment the first Marine bar gunner pulled his trigger and started teaching the terrible mathematics of modern war. The story of the bar in the Pacific is, ultimately, a story of how industrial capacity defeats warrior tradition, how mass production overcomes individual courage, and how modern warfare rewards not the bravest soldiers, but the most productive factories. It is a lesson written in the thousands of cave entrances scattered across the Pacific, each one scarred by the bar rounds that ricocheted through the darkness, bringing death to soldiers who had been taught to believe that their spirit could triumph over steel. That belief died with them, and from its death, a new Japan was born, one that understood that true national power comes not from military conquests but from economic development, not from warrior tradition but from industrial innovation, not from a willingness to die but from the capacity to produce. The Browning automatic rifle had delivered this lesson in the only language war understands: overwhelming, undeniable, lethal force.